One of the arguments that people keep popping out is, what about this team? What about that team? What about this one? These teams were all in rebuilds, and it seems to be the same names as far as the names that are being thrown out there. Giants, Jets, Jags, Browns, and some people throwing the Bengals in this mix as well. So I wanted to take a look at where each of these teams were. Now, the Giants are the only ones with an actual good record right now of 4-1. That's fantastic for them. And we can get into what's different about them. Some of the big things different with them is they're in their 4th year of their supposed franchise quarterback in Daniel Jones, who they're still not sure about. They're in their 5th year with their all-generational running back, Saquon Barkley, who's finally looking like the running back they thought they were getting 5 years ago. But this is a team that has had a whole bunch of turnaround as well. You're talking about since Tom Coughlin was their head coach from 04 to 15. You saw Ben McAdoo for 2 years, Steve Spagnuolo for part of a year, Pat Shurmur for a couple years, Joe Judge for a couple years, and Brian Daboll now in his first run with it. But the Giants are in the same situation as far as the cap space is concerned. They're one of the best teams with money that has not been spent and available to use for the upcoming season. But they're not in the same position the Lions are in. We're talking about a year 5 running back and a year 4 quarterback. It's a brand new head coach, but it's not a brand new GM. So they're in a different position than the Lions have been in completely at this point. Now you want to take a look at someone like the Jets, who obviously the big comparison because everyone was looking at Saleh to be the head coach for the Lions is a possibility. The Jets, also a different position. The New York Jets, same thing as the Lions, though. A lot of different head coaches ever since Bill Parcells was their head coach for a few years. They've had bad head coach after bad head coach. The best they got was a Rex Ryan who still couldn't get to 500, went to a couple AFC championship games with the Jets, but couldn't get to 500 as a record, not a winning record. Todd Bowles, not a winning record. Adam Gase, we saw what disaster that was. Saleh so far is 7-15. And defense is where apparently he makes his name. The Jets defensively this year are starting to look a little better. But there are just as many questions in Jets country about Saleh as there are in Lions country about Dan Campbell. We don't see them because our focus is on the Detroit Lions. But go look up some of the stuff being spoken about the Jets. Yes, they're happy about how they're looking right now at 3-2. So far this year, but there have been questions throughout this entire season as well. The next one, to me, this is just crazy. You want to talk about the Browns, who are 2-3, have spent more money than God can even produce for this team. They have a top-end player money-wise at their quarterback, their running back, their D-line, their defensive backs. They've spent money all over the place to try and get out of the hell that they have been in forever. And they're still in it. They have one playoff appearance in the last so many years. They're not doing it consistently either. And I don't want the Lions to have we were good for this 1 year and then we're back to being terrible, which is what the Browns have been year in and year out for God knows how long. And then the last one is the Jags. The Jags, it's just, look, you went from Urban Meyer, who was an absolute joke, to a Super Bowl winning head coach in Doug Peterson, who has the credentials and has the wherewithal to be a good pro NFL coach. They have their quarterback of the future, or what they perceive to be their quarterback of the future, in Trevor Lawrence. And they have what is considered a more of a soft rebuild than a total rebuild, which is where they are piecing together pieces from teams that were still there before and putting them together with teams that guys that are coming in now. But it's not a complete and total rebuild the way that the Detroit Lions are trying to completely from the ground up build this organization into something that's different than what we have seen for the last 25 plus years. As the 21st century came around, the Lions have been, for the most part, an embarrassment to the word football. And we are trying to not have that 1 year where Stafford and them 2014 or 2012, whatever that year was, where we got screwed in the playoffs of the Cowboys and all that. Great, it was 1 year. What did we do otherwise? We didn't do anything otherwise. We are trying to break that trend, and that's where I need the patience to come in from the fan base. I'm never going to get it. There's no chance. Some feel the way I do, some don't. But as a fan base, we are trying to break a trend of what we've been for so long, and by doing it the same way we've been doing it doesn't make any sense. That's literally the definition of insanity, of doing the same thing again and again and trying to see a different result. You're not going to get a different result by continuously bashing who you have and giving up on them before there's time to actually see improvement. I think we have seen some improvement so far. It's all on the offensive side of the ball. On the defensive side of the ball, there has to be improvement eventually. Eventually is not forever. I think we're going to see improvement by the second half of this football season, honestly. I think if our guys can get healthy, if we can see what Paschal brings to the table, which can free things up for Aiden Hutchinson to do his job better, because like you have said so many times already on this show, he has half a game of football he's shown so far this year. And that's it. PFF can grade him however they want. I see him overrun a rookie fourth-round quarterback, and the quarterback just escapes him very easily. Zappe got away from Hutch with no problems on that play that Hutch just completely overran him. He has been a little bit involved, but not as much as obviously we'd hope. And yes, he has been double-teamed quite a bit. Why? Because there's no one else on the defensive line that's really that talented, that's worth the attention that he is, apparently. I think Paschal will bring a different ingredient to the table, which will allow Hutch to do his job better, because Paschal is going to be getting some pressure as well. At least that's what I hope. That's what I saw coming out of Kentucky, and I hope we see it for him on the field for the Lions as well.
You do hope so. I guess one thing I would say is the Jags look better, and Urban Meyer was a dumpster fire, but they recognized he was a dumpster fire immediately and fired him. They didn't wait till whatever his contract was. I'm sure it was probably 5-6 years. Like, they saw it, they said, no, this guy isn't working. Boom, got rid of him. And again, now they're 2-3. The Jags aren't some powerhouse, but they have a lot to be excited about. And to your point, a lot of that stems from them having a young quarterback. Even with Trevor Lawrence, even with the Jets, they have Zach Wilson, who wasn't here for most of the season so far, and the Jets are 3-2. I would understand why their fans would be excited, but they're still, again, winning games with Joe Flacco. They just dropped 40 points on a Miami team that people were really hyped up about. The Giants that you mentioned, 4-1. The schedule they played is pretty laughable, but they've won 4 out of the 5 games. So, like, you can't, and they just beat the Packers. So it's not like all the teams that they're playing, they're just playing the 5 worst teams in the NFL.
Right.
I think the biggest difference is with the Lions. So these other teams are still bad. They still don't have a lot of talent. Not that I think the Lions do. Maybe the Lions were operating from the biggest deficit of any of these teams. Again, we just talked about 2 of those teams have a young quarterback that they still really, and the Giants don't, right? They didn't pick up Daniel Jones' 5th-year option, which kind of tells you everything that you need to know about how they feel about Daniel Jones. And I'm sure if their season went a little bit worse and they were in contention for the number 1 pick, like some people thought they might be, then they take C.J. Stroud or Bryce Young, Will Levis, whoever ends up being the number 1 guy at the end of the year. Now, might they still move on from Daniel Jones? Maybe, but I think they just have a different reason to be excited, and their reason is probably the fact that they like their coach, right? Their coach is out there. Their coach is making some of the same ballsy moves that Dan Campbell is making. It's just working for Brian Daboll, and it's not working for Dan Campbell here in Detroit. And then again, we don't have that young quarterback to get excited about. If the Jags were 2-3 and they didn't have Trevor Lawrence and Gardner Minshew was still their quarterback, there wouldn't be nearly as much excitement. But they see the growth that Lawrence has made, and they're still projecting him out in the future to be this great quarterback, and the Lions don't have that. We have that with Swift and Amon-Ra and Jameson Williams when he comes back, and Aiden Hutchinson, and there are guys that we feel like that about, but we don't think we have a franchise quarterback. Even the guys who like Jared Goff, they don't think that he is some like franchise-changing quarterback. They just think he's a good quarterback, much like you would think Kirk Cousins is a good quarterback, or how some people felt about Stafford. Now, people felt stronger about Stafford than they did about Goff, certainly, and they should have, because Stafford's a better quarterback. But I don't think it's unfair to compare the Lions rebuild to some of these others, and especially when you're getting frustrated because you see some of these guys who are second-year head coaches. The Jets kind of especially, where you look at Saleh and you thought, that's a dude that should be in Detroit, and then some weird reporting when it came out that Lions weren't so interested in him, and he was like, well, all about being a Lion here. And all of that, hey, this didn't happen, was essentially being blamed on the Lions. Like, the Lions just didn't like him as their guy. And if that ends up being a mistake, and Dan Campbell gets fired after next year, and then Robert Saleh goes on to lead the Jets to back wild card appearances or something, people are just going to be mad that the Lions made that decision. And I think there's part of it that's fair. I think the most fair part of it is looking at, and when people say the Lions just don't have the talent, how can you expect them to win? I don't know that the Giants are so much more talented. Saquon Barkley would be the best player on either team, most definitely. But I don't look at the Lions and think, oh, that's just some team that's oozing with talent. Same thing with the Jets. Same thing with the Jaguars. They obviously had the number 1 pick with Trayvon Walker, but if the Lions had the number 1 pick, most of our fans would have wanted us to take Aiden Hutchinson anyway. They thought we had the best player in the draft. And you look at the Jaguars offense, you have James Robinson, you have Etienne, but they don't really have anything wide receiver, right? They have Marvin Jones. Who else did? They're the ones who paid Christian Kirk all that money, so their receivers are just like kind of whatever. Is sort of, I guess, in a similar boat with the Lions, right? Where you have Amon Ra, who you think is really good, and then you're looking at Chark, and, obviously Jameson Williamson not here yet. Then you got guys Raymond and Quintez Cephas and stuff. So I think it's more fair than maybe you do, but as always with anything in the NFL, it's not an apples to apples comparison.
I agree for the most part. The Jets one is a more fair apples-to-apples comparison because you have Saleh, who's in his 2nd year. Their general manager, Joe Douglas, is in his 3rd year, and he's been held to the flame as well. And I know we're trying to compare them and think that everything's all sunshine and rainbows over there and that it's all hell over here, but it's not. It's definitely not the case over there. He's in his 3rd year. His winning percentage coming into this season, he was 6-27 as they're coming into this offseason. So the Jets have not been good with Joe Douglas at the helm. They're trying to get better with Robert Saleh, but just like with the Lions, the Jets gave Douglas a 6-year contract because he inherited a bad roster. The organization's been in turmoil, and he is trying to take a slow, steady approach to remaking this roster and turning them into a winner. I think we need to be the same, and obviously the front office does. They gave that same contract for Brad Holmes and them all these years to try and actually build something. And we as fans, look, this is what we do. We react to what we see on Sundays. That's how it works. And we forget what happened the Sunday before, and we'll forget what happened this past Sunday in a few weeks as well if all of a sudden the Lions start putting up 35 points and the defense somehow holds teams to 25 points and we win 3 straight. Like, all of a sudden it's all going to be forgotten. That's how we work. But you can't overreact either way. It's a slow process. It's not a quick process. And for people who point out things like the Bengals went from worst to first, the Bengals were in a completely different situation where you're talking about a team that consistently made the playoffs. Did they win a playoff game? No. But Marvin Lewis led them to the playoffs year in and year out before they finally said enough is enough and let's tear this whole thing down. And then obviously after the first pick with Joe Burrow, and then he got hurt, so it ended up being another bad year, so they could use another early pick, and they brought his wide receiver in, but then they went in the offseason and spent all sorts of money to build the team around him with veterans who've been doing the job for a while and can continue to do the job now in Cincinnati. The Lions haven't gotten there yet. We haven't went out and gotten the veterans that want to come to Detroit and make this team better. It needs time to happen, and we need to not overreact whether it's good or bad. My opinion, obviously, but that's how I feel.
Yeah, you always feel like we should give people more time, but you also can't. Again, just be out here making all these dumb decisions, and I haven't watched every Jags, Giants, or Jets game to know if their coaches are making similarly dumb decisions. So I guess I will leave that up to any Jets, Jags, or Giants fans that we have in the comments here to let me know that. But I would say that would be my biggest difference, because I would assume that even if they're making dumb decisions, it is not at the same frequency that Mr. Campbell is.
All right, obviously people are going, oh, the bye week's here, so there should be some people getting fired during the bye week, and we should have something different coming in after the bye week. I am not expecting anything of the kind, me personally. You expecting anyone to be fired?
No, I don't think anybody's going to get fired.
Okay. Well, we will be using this time wisely to get prepped up for the NBA and NHL seasons, which are right around the corner. So we'll be talking Pistons and Red Wings a little bit going forward over these next show or two before we obviously dive back into the Lions. And, of course, we'll preview the Michigan State Spartans football team and the Michigan Wolverines, who have a big game against Penn State coming up this weekend. We will be previewing that, obviously, on our next show. But that is going to do it for this show. I want to thank you guys for kicking it with Griffin and Bass. For Ryan Griffin, I'm Matt Bassin. As always, with thanks for the children. We'll see y'all in a couple days. Peace.
Hey, Ryan Griffin here.
Thank you so much for watching today's episode of Griffin and Bass. Be sure to give us your thoughts in the comments below. Remember to click the bell to receive the latest notifications from DSN and subscribe for breaking news, community blogs, polls, contests, and other content.